Welcome to the Ash Cloud. I'm Ash Sweeting. Today we're following on the conversation around cow efficiency and how understanding how much grass a cow takes to produce a calf or a ewe to produce a lamb is critical not only to farmer profitability and ranch profitability, but also the sustainability of the industry. It remains one of the biggest grey areas and least known areas of livestock production. Today we're joined by Andrew Freshwater, who spent the last 30-odd years using data to drive efficient breeding decisions across his sheep and cattle production enterprises in southeastern Australia. Andrew, thank you very much for joining me today.
That's my pleasure.
So you run multiple properties, beef and sheep, in southern or in eastern Australia. Can you please just start by telling us a bit about what you do, the properties you run, and how you got to be where you are at the moment?
Bloody hard work, I guess, is the easy answer. I was actually just talking to a friend in Germany before, and I sort of joked that the harder you work, the luckier you get. And that was told to me by an old Italian family my father used to buy bulls off back in the 1980s. I guess we really just look at what's the best way to turn grass into its highest value. Traditionally, that's been sheep farming with cattle as a lower proportion. But that's starting to change for us now. It's becoming a lot easier to be able to trade cattle and also become more involved in the genetic side of cattle, to basically value add the grass going through them and turn them into a higher value. Like everywhere, our input costs are growing substantially year on year. So we just need to keep in front of that.
I guess in terms of that value adding grass, what are the priorities in terms of what you need to get right to do that as best as you can, and what are the risks and challenges you have to manage on the other side of that coin?
I guess the big thing is if you're trading a steer or a heifer, you need to be able to know that you've got 4 to 5 months of grass in front of you. So you don't want to get partway through a cattle trade and suddenly have to start feeding grain or inputs that you haven't counted on, because that can obviously ruin the profit of that trade and send you backwards, and it can become cumulative. So if you run out of grass, just that recovery takes a hell of a lot longer. Well, the big thing that I can see moving forward, and I certainly noticed it last year when we were pretty tight for grass, is the feed conversion efficiency of animals. We run a composite shedding sheep that we've trademarked the name Catalyst for, and I've worked pretty hard on the resilience of those sheep in dry times. Notice they got through with no problems whatsoever. Noticed on the cattle side that the animals that had a bit of a feed conversion also got through, and the slightly smaller animals. And I know there's a fair bit of talk that you need to be running smaller cows. What I found is, yes, broadly speaking, that's right, but there's always exceptions to the rule. So there's a multiple amount of things that we need to consider. Like anything in a biological system, it's not a simple straight line, and you've got to keep monitoring every day and always assume that you're wrong. And the first tap on the shoulder that you are wrong, you need to be prepared to change your plan pretty quick and not have much emotion tied up in it.
So can we dig, because obviously you're value adding grass, the more of the final product you get for the input, which is the grass, that's the feed conversion, the feed efficiency. So it's something that is a growing conversation in the livestock industries.
Yeah.
If you go and speak to any other industry, the transport industry, the airport, the airline industry, they've been talking about fuel efficiency and all those sort of stuff for decades. So how do you go about improving the feed efficiency? what can you learn from other industries? And are there any particular leaders or people you see in the livestock industries have been doing this for longer than you have that you reach out to for advice and ideas and leadership?
I'd say in the beef industry, it's pretty hard to go past Lee Leachman in the US. I've known Lee for years, and we use a stabilizer style animal. But the work that those guys have done on feed efficiency is obviously world leading. Um, yeah, I also look to the pig industries and the poultry industries. I know they have different. They're not ruminants, but they tend to be a lot more focused on the efficiency of the feed that goes down those animals' throats. I don't think we're as focused. Well, we aren't as focused at the moment in beef and sheep. I would like to think though that that's starting to change fairly quickly. If you look at the genetics of sheep and cattle, do we actually need more growth? Do we need more intramuscular fat? Do we need all those things? Probably not. But we really need to focus on health and welfare traits, and you wouldn't call them convenience traits, but the feed efficiency traits and better use of resources.
So
Yeah, it costs us about 19 cents per kilo to grow a kilo of dry matter. And if you start adding that up, it can become quite a frightening figure.
so that's the cost to grow a kilo of dry matter grass or
Yeah,
pasture.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And then back to that overall feed efficiency side of things, I guess there's two sides to that coin. One is how much an individual eats compared to how much they produce, and the other is the resilient side of things, the ones that don't actually ever get into the market for whatever reason, disease or they're infertile or whatever that happens to be that you're putting all that feed into, but don't actually get any product and have an overall dilution across the herd or the flock.
yeah. So we ran a group of heifers through last year, and knowing full well that they were not the style of heifers that we really wanted, but it was kind of like just a year long data collection, I guess, on grass just to see the difference. We DNA tested all those heifers through Zoetis, the Inherit Select product, and it's really interesting to look at the results that their efficiency is horrible. Um, their production throughout the year was horrible, and you start working out what they've made you for the year, and it's not that much. If you compare those to another group of heifers that were running the same contemporary group, we made excellent money on those, and the ones that we were playing around with made the result pretty average. So it's a huge difference, and something that we're just not looking at. I still hear people say, "Well, don't worry about the grass. It doesn't really cost you anything to grow grass." Well, it does. Even the overheads of land to buy a hectare of land in this region of northeast Victoria can be anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000 a hectare. We run about, I guess you'd say, 12 to 16 DSE per hectare. So you add that up over a 30-year period, and the average level of profit per DSE per year, and you've got to have all your wits about you to pay land off. And you certainly can't do that if you're running inefficient animals on that land.
So there's a few things that have come up in what you've said. One is data collection and data management and data analysis. It's having the numbers to actually make
Yeah.
data-driven decisions from. And the second is obviously if you've got those two groups of heifers and you're running them on your property, then the management and the feed and all that sort of stuff is going to be pretty similar. So that kind of leads back to the genetics, which then opens up another huge door to more data and numbers and data collection. So is that one way of thinking about it?
Yeah, definitely. I've got a friend in New Zealand called Andy Ramsden, and he's a sheep breeding guru. I think he said to me about 30 years ago, breeding animals was Swiss, start where it starts. So you need to start with the genetics. Um, I've run a long-term progeny testing program on our shedding sheep, and so over the years, we've ended up with a bit over 80,000 sheep run through that system, and there's about 3.5 million data points. So I've, over the last 12 months, taken all that and built my own computer program to actually crunch all those numbers. Like if you look at static estimated breeding values, an animal that might work perfectly where you are might be a complete disaster for where I am. So what I've done, instead of looking at those static numbers, is it has gone through all the breeding values and all the raw data and phenotypic data that I can find, run it through a Monte Carlo simulation, and it will come up with the most profitable animal for my area for what I'm trying to achieve. And if I'm saying to someone, they might be at Dubbo and they say, we want to buy a group of ewes off you, which one should we buy? We can then actively go through those animals with all their production records and recommend the best ewes to buy so they can get a decent experience and not end up with a bunch of animals that they say, well, hang on, these ones don't work here. On breeding values, they might be the best animals there, but they might just not suit that situation. So I think where we need to get to in agriculture is to move away from these static indexes. They've been fantastic up until a point, but we need to be really thinking a lot harder how we index animals and making them live, utilizing live data, probably moving more into using AI. And I know AI can spit out bad results, but it can also spit out good results. And there's a lot of upside to come from working out how to use it to your benefit, especially in a farming system.
So just to provide a bit of context, where you are to Dubbo, you're in northern Victoria. Dubbo is what, 500-600 kilometers
Yeah,
further
give or take.
further
Yeah.
north, a little more subtropical, different types of grasses, drier, different seasons, that kind of stuff. And that's enough of a difference that certain sheep or cattle will do better in one location than another, and they need to be locally adapted.
Yeah. So what I've done is actually built the system so it looks at the long-term weather. So it takes in all the weather details for as long as there are records. Looks at all the climatic information, and you can put in your grass types or what you plan to feed these animals, and it'll come up with some recommendations. I've found it really helpful. Sort of stress tested it here and found that it actually works, which I'm quite happy about. But it means that we can become more targeted. I think everyone's gone out and bought a group of animals that they think will be the best thing since sliced cheese, and got them home and been disappointed where the long-term results haven't been quite as they expected. So I've just tried to put something together that makes it easier, particularly for my business, to get more information. I guess I'm a bit of a genetics and data tragic over the years. I tend to not have other hobbies besides sit down and crunch numbers and look through what ifs and look through ways that we can breed better animals.
So firstly, how much crossover is there between what you're doing with sheep and what you're doing with the cattle? Is it basically starting from scratch each time, or is there a lot of stuff that you can leverage across?
No, I found there's quite a lot of crossover. A hell of a lot of crossover, actually. I guess it helps that you're dealing with ruminants, so that's a good start. But I found there's quite a lot of crossover. Um, Everything sort of points to, if you think back to the 1980s, that style of Angus cow that we had back in the 1980s, which was quite a large animal and probably ended up looking a little bit more like a Frisian cow at times throughout the year. They're definitely the animals that don't make us any money and cost us money and send us backwards. And so we need to have a smaller animal. I don't subscribe to the animals that are frame score 3, frame score 4. I think they're too small, but there's a happy medium. On the sheep side, we use an accelerated lambing system, the Cornell Star system that came out of the US. So they're lambing you get some that lamb every 6 months, but they average about every 7.2 months. That, to me, has worked really well, but you've got to have the right kind of sheep that can handle that. Particularly if you've got an animal that's lambing in the middle of January in Australia, in the kind of heat we're getting at the moment, they need to be of a particular sort. So I don't think there's any recipe. Like there's no blanket recipe. You've just really got to think about where your own farm is, what the capabilities of that farm are, what the capabilities of the management team are, and then building the system around that. Otherwise, you can end up with a massive failure if you try and run before you walk properly.
And just to take a step back, this is, from what you said, there's a lot of data been collected. There's a lot of analytics built on this. So I guess where did you start with this, and how long have you been building it? And just talk us through that. You didn't jump here in one step. It's there's as you said, it's that the harder you work, the luckier you get. And you must be pretty lucky with all the work that you've put into this.
I when I was a kid back in the early 1980s, we were crossing Angus with Hereford. Um, I didn't know why, but I knew that we were getting good results, and we were always, um, mum and dad were always aiming for those animals. My family brought Angus cattle to Australia in 1849, and they brought Romney sheep over here at the same time. So we've kind of been hanging around sheep and cattle for a long time. Um, I was fortunate enough to start my own Romney sheep stud when I was 12 years old, back in the 80s. And I think it was about 1989, I was probably one of the very early adopters. I, I put sheep on land plan, put Romney sheep on land plan, and had no idea why we were doing it. But I just thought in my head it makes sense to be able to record those animals and see how they look against other people. It was quite funny because we used to show sheep at the Melbourne show, and I remember going to a Romney meeting and the older fellas saying to me, I was just a young teenager at the time, whatever happened to all the good sheep breeders if we need numbers now to breed sheep? And that breeding sheep was an art, not a science. And I've actually got written up on the whiteboard in my office, is breeding animals an art or a science? I think it's a happy medium between the two, but the science part definitely helps. So we started performance recording a long time ago, um, and I've always collected information. And just as I guess as you get older and you start working out what's the cost of running a farm, like I started farming in my own right when I was 23, so that was a pretty early start. And when the money's coming out of your bank account and going into your bank account, you soon work out that it's better off to have more of it coming in than going out. Um, and that revolves around having animals that perform under the conditions that you're trying to farm under, and that can only happen by selecting better animals. Back in the 90s, that was bloody hard work because there wasn't a lot of information around, and we're fortunate now that as time goes by, we've got huge amounts of information to us now. I remember taking DNA tests for sheep back in about 2009, and sending them off to Brisbane. And the guys there saying to me, you won't get any information out of this at the moment that's usable, but in time you will. Who would have thought a few short years later, the information that we can get out of genomics and DNA tests? And I think we've only just touched the sides of where that's going to go. So really, it's been, I guess, a long career up until this point of just collecting the information, being reasonably frustrated by the fact that it's not fully usable just yet, but hoping that the information will be fully usable as time goes by. It's worked pretty well so far, and hopefully it continues to work.
So on that note of where it could go, I'm not going to hold you to any predictions, obviously, but I guess, what excites you and what concerns you about that? And yeah, what's your thoughts on that?
Genetics is like driving a really fast car. You can put your foot flat to the floor and have a crash pretty easy, but if you drive that car properly, you can get great performance out of it. I think moving forward, like I look at our cow herd here, and I think this year we'll probably take our top 10%. We'll probably start doing more IVF, and we'll start implanting those embryos into our bottom cows. There's just no point running those bottom cows. So looking forward commercially, when we're looking to buy a group of replacement heifers or something, perhaps we go to those people, go to a provider and say, can you provide animals to these breeding values or these specifications? And that's done via large scale IVF. I think that's probably where we're going to end up. We'll see a huge amount of AI with breeding decisions. I'm not totally sold on AI yet, but I think it'll get there. There's a lot of things that AI can't work out with livestock breeding.
You're talking
It'll
about
probably get
artificial
there over time.
intelligence, not artificial insemination
Yeah,
AI here.
artificial intelligence. I think it'll get there over time. And it's probably one of those things, the more information that we can put in there, the more we can use. At the moment, you put information in and it can be a little bit questionable at the best of times. I think we'll continue to see a declining terms of trade. Like that's happened for the last, thousands of years in farming. It's not going to get any better. So we just need to be a lot more focused on how we spend our money in sheep and cattle farming. And that might look in the future entirely different to what it's looked like for the past couple of 100 years in farming, particularly in Australia. I don't know if intensifying our farming with breeding animals is the way to go in this part of the world. I know, I spent a bit of time in the sheep industry in Scandinavia, and everything's obviously in sheds because it's so cold and there's snow. That's really interesting, but you start thinking about the efficiency of those animals in that situation. And once again, there's good animals and there's bad animals, but that's a pretty high overhead situation. I don't think that's one that we can work with in Australia. So I think the future, I know that's a long way around, but the future is really, it's what we make it. And I think there's no set pattern of where things are going to go. I think there's going to be a huge amount of technology and science, obviously. I think the next generation coming through are going to want to be continually excited. I'm 52 now. I'm sort of the wrong side of 50. And you look at 30-year-olds coming through and they understand computers and what technology can do. And they're kind of I guess you call them the Facebook generation. We'll see a lot more of that. I'm probably the last generation that kind of bridge that partial computer, partial old style of doing things, but things will change pretty quickly. We've got to get a lot of excitement in farming. I think we're going, particularly in the sheep industry at the moment, we're going through a bit of a lull in excitement, which concerns me greatly. There's a lot of sheep leaving the industry. Some people say that's good for the industry. Some people say that's bad for the industry. I'm not so sure either are right at the moment. We're getting great prices, but we need some drastic changes in the sheep industry as well. I think the beef industry looks fantastic in Australia. We're obviously world leaders in beef. We've got great markets. So we just need to keep doing what we're doing and seeing where we end up. But I think it's all positive.
What do you think is needed to get that excitement to get the younger people? This is an old age. This is not a new question or a new problem or
Yeah.
something that's limited to Australia or the United States or Europe or anywhere in particular. But what are your thoughts on that incentivization side of things?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. I speak with mates of mine who they're starting to talk about succession and their sons coming through. The first thing they want to do is get rid of the sheep. And you speak to the sons and say, well, why don't you want to farm sheep? And say, well, in the middle of summer, why do we want to stand in a hot shearing shed with flies and maggots and that sort of thing? That's understandable. The general workload around sheep, I think, for the return isn't very attractive to a lot of newcomers coming in. So that's a real concern. I think a lot of people, younger generation, don't see a bright future in sheep. They see a lot of hard work in front of them. They see a lot of menial jobs and they see a basic amount of income coming out of them. And I know Australia, we've tried to spin that in all manner of directions over the years and put fairy floss around it and all sorts of things. But I think the hard reality is, there's a lot of people in their 30s would rather sit on a tractor and put a crop in and take that risk or run a mob of cattle than what they would chase a mob of sheep around. I don't know the answer. I wish I did. It's a tough one. It's something I think about quite a lot.
Is there educational components? Is there engagement between city kids and the rural areas? That sort of is that part of the challenge, or is it more on the economics and the workload, is what you've alluded to?
Yeah, I don't. And we keep hearing about this city country divide, but the only people that I hear really speaking about it are the country people. Every person in a major city that I know loves farmers. We have family from Melbourne come out and they talk for the next 12 months and show photos and continue to talk about the great time they've had. They're not concerned about the country city divide. It's just us. Um, I think we need to rethink the way that we interact with people in capital cities. Um, yeah, so if you look at it on a DSE return, you can make as much out of running a cow as what you can a sheep. Um, if you're wanting to improve the grazing and everything, you can run a cow behind a single wire. Running a sheep behind a single wire is a fair bit harder, so there's that extra labour component. Um, drenching. I was saying to a mate the other day, if you want to get 1,000 sheep in and weigh them and drench them, it takes a bit of work, even with auto drafters. If you want to get 1,000 steers in and weigh them and drench them, you can backline them and run them through, and it's not as difficult. It's probably going to take you, give or take, the same time, give or take a few hours.
It's a few
The
extra
the
kilos of produce in 1,000
yeah,
steers than 1,000 sheep.
yeah. So that's a change too. We probably need to be able to market what we're doing in lamb a bit better, particularly the lamb production world. I know wool's tried to market itself forever, but it seems to be trying to reinvent itself every couple of years, and I don't see that marketing actually going anywhere. There's a few standouts that I see around the world. There's the in New Zealand there's the Estino, which is a composite merino style animal that's being used in air filtration. That's really exciting stuff. But the notion that produce a lot of wool and people will wear wool, I don't see that many people wearing wool as an everyday item where I travel around the world. They all want to eat protein. So concentrating on that meat market probably holds more future, I think. I might have a totally skewed view as well. We haven't shorn a sheep in 16 years. We're all shedding sheep. So, but I kind of looked at that wool market years ago, and I thought it's not something that I can see a bright future in. So, I'm probably looking at it through rose-colored glasses to an extent.
And you have been fortunate enough to have traveled quite a bit around the world. So how do you see what we've been discussing from an Australian perspective as, being relevant or different in the different parts of the world you've been traveling to, the issues and the challenges?
Yeah, animal welfare is becoming big. When I was in Sweden last year, I had a couple of people tell me that Australian cattle feedlots weren't very good because they had poor animal welfare. And I sort of had to show them some photos and show them the welfare that we did do, which is much better than what I saw over there. And they were actually quite shocked. So the welfare is becoming quite big everywhere. I think that's a really good thing. I think our animal welfare is probably something we need to keep working on around the world. Um, we're almost moving to a two-step market that I can see. There's a really high-end product that people are looking for, and they're more than happy to pay for it. And then there's a base product where people just need a supply of protein. So that two-step market, I think, is becoming larger and larger. Um, Provenance, I think, will become larger when food safety concerns around the world become a big thing. So, the interesting thing that I've found traveling around the world is we're actually not very different. Everyone's pretty much the same. There's obviously different languages and different accents. Everyone basically thinks the same.
You mentioned your families have been on the land in Australia raising livestock since for well over a century. So from that, I'm probably fair to assume that the whole sustainability of everything is a priority for you and your family. How do you see that from your perspective?
I was fortunate enough in the 1990s to meet Alan Savory, and a fellow called Bruce Ward in Australia. And be fair to say, if it wasn't for Bruce Ward, I wouldn't have continued farming. I was pretty jaded in the mid 1990s. We had a fairly degraded asset that I was farming, and I couldn't see a way to change it. Everything that I'd learned at university didn't work, which I found quite frustrating. And then started to look at it from a different angle. So it's really, I really, going down that holistic farming path was fantastic. I wouldn't call myself a regenerative farmer because I think that's a marketing term. Holistic farming, on the other hand, is a decision making tool. So if you're making your decisions against a goal of where you want to get to, well, that's a pretty good process to go down. Using a marketing tool to describe how you're running a farm, I don't think is so good and will lead to consequences that you've never intended. So I think that long-term sustainability thing for me is we perhaps don't need to sustain an asset in its current state. Australia as a whole is a pretty old country. We've got pretty degraded soils, pretty degraded landscapes. We need to continually improve those. But when people say to me they're regenerating them to what? Is there an end point? Do they know what they're regenerating them to? Are they trying to reinvent history? I don't think a lot of these people know. But if we continue to improve the capacity of that farmland and improve the resilience of it, that's not a bad thing. So it's front of mind in everything we do. Like our original family farm is now Loyang Power Station. That didn't end up very sustainable.
And is there anything particular from that Alan Savory type of an approach that you think we're sharing?
Yeah. Always assume you're wrong, and at the first sign that says that you are wrong, change your mind and go a different tact. And always keep asking questions before you make a decision. I think there's an old Japanese thing where you keep peeling the layers of the onion back. I remember Bruce Ward telling me about it years ago. You need to continue to ask, I think it's 5 or 6 questions about why are you actually carrying out the thing that you're carrying out? Does it lead to where you want to go to, or is it taking you further away from where you want to go to? So that continual asking of questions and doing everything towards your holistic context of where you want to see your life and your farm business end up. And remembering that it's the old three-cornered stool. You take out one of the legs of the stool and everything falls over. So nothing happens in isolation. And the other thing is, nature hates a vacuum. You take one thing away, what's it going to be replaced with? At the moment, the last few years, we've had a Bathurst burr problem. We've had to spray it. I don't really like using chemicals. Sometimes it's necessary. But you spray that country out and you think, well, what's going to replace this? We've been fortunate with the grazing and the management that it's been replaced by perennial grasses. We still have a bit of Bathurst burr come up. And we're lucky that vacuum was taken up with, well, not lucky, we managed towards perennial grasses and we managed away from what was causing Bathurst burr. We'll still need to spray a bit of country here and there for Bathurst burr, but nowhere nearly as badly as what we had to 3 or 4 years ago. So it's really just continuing to manage towards what you want.
When I interviewed Alan Savory, we talked about how climate change and those environmental challenges are the result or so heavily dependent on government policy, and the government policies that governments implement drive so much of our behavior. How do you see the current government policies, and where would you like to see changes?
I think governments all over the world need a size 13 work boot fairly swiftly up the rear end. We mentioned before the city country disconnect, which I don't believe fully exists. I think the political disconnect around the world is massive, and I think that's an enormous problem. Um, we've seen it. A classic example of that disconnect is in my part of Australia. Our government is been playing games with Country Fire Authority. They give them a bunch of money, then they take a bunch of money away. They're trying to put another tax on, or do they call it? They don't call it a tax; they call it a levy. So that's a nice way of saying we're going to give you another tax on landholders to increase a levy. That money isn't going through to its actual what it should be used for. We've got old fire trucks that are 30 years old with no air conditioning, and people having to stand outside on the backs of the trucks when they're going to and from fires. That kind of thing to me is a massive failure of government. The very fact that governments around the world are failing people concerns me. I guess if we look at the US at the moment, there's a hell of a lot of turmoil in the US. Whether you like Donald Trump or don't like Donald Trump, I guess is a personal opinion, but a fair bit of the world's starting to become fairly vocal about their opinion. I tend to agree with them. That to me is where you're seeing politics potentially leading to civil unrest. And we've seen it recently. There's been a bit of unrest in America. The classic old saying, the difference between a happy population and rioting is 3 days of hunger. There's a few politicians around the world have tried that and they've come off second best. I think Alan Savory is probably fairly right, as usual. Alan's always pretty right. He's a deep thinker. He's been around for a while, and he's lived one hell of a life, and he's seen a lot of changes and had to do some things that I guess along the way haven't been overly comfortable. But when Alan talks, it's a pretty good idea to listen, and I think Alan's bang on the money once again.
I completely agree with the whole with Alan's experiences and wisdom, and I think that the another interview where there are these political cracks that come in between various different people, and then nefarious actors start exploiting those for their own. They don't really care about either side. They just exploit the cracks for their own means, and that exacerbates the problems.
Yeah, and the people that suffer are the citizens of each country, and usually it's the citizens that don't have the wherewithal or the ability to stand up for themselves. So that's where we're starting to see a widening of the lower class and the upper class. Middle class Australia is starting to disappear, and I think middle classes around the world are starting to disappear. We're really turning into a population of haves and have-nots.
And does that, I guess, is somewhat reflected by what you're saying about the market, where there's that very, very premium end and then a much more commodity end. The middle seems to be hollowing out, as which aligns to what you just said.
Yeah, yeah, and I think everyone keeps talking premiums. I always hear people say we want to produce X, Y, Z, and we want a premium for it. Well, are there premiums or are there discounts? I prefer to think of it as the price that we're going to get is the price. We just don't want to be discounted. Um, Unfortunately, those middle class markets that used to exist, um, they're probably going to tighten up, or they are tightening up around the world. But we also got to remember that the people who can't afford to be eating rump steak or lamb chops every day, they need to be fed as well. And we need to be thinking of what are the secondary cuts and the mince meats and everything. How do we make sure that that's a competitive value and a great nutritional source for those people who, for whatever reason, just simply can't afford to buy that high end food? We can't leave people behind. Nutritionally, we can't leave people behind, and socially, we can't leave people behind. And that, I think, that's a growing concern that if we continue to move into this two step society, that some people may get left behind along the way.
And I think going back on that, if you're the more efficiently you're producing your animals, the more margin you have in there, or the more room to be able to produce something that is at a price that is affordable to more people. If your costs are up, then you're going to want to sell that. You're going to need to sell that for a higher price to for you just to stay viable.
Low cost of production wins every day. It's sometimes not pretty and it's pretty boring and a long, hard trudge, but low cost of production wins every day in every marketplace.
On that note, you frequently post some fairly passionate, things on social media and pictures of your animals. What excites you most about being a livestock producer? And this is the year of rangelands and pastoralists. So, there's a lot of people out there. I think something over 1.15 billion odd people around the world make their livelihood from livestock production and pastoralism. Um, so what excites you about that space?
Well, it's funny. I get a lot of messages, probably on a daily basis, people saying, you post a lot on social media. Yes, I enjoy telling our story. I personally think we're doing a pretty good job. We can always improve what we're doing, and I'm always open to comments as to how we can improve that. I enjoy showing people around the world and contacts that I've made and everything what we're up to day to day. It can become a pretty lonely life when you're standing by yourself in a paddock with no interaction with people. Maybe the modern day that we have that interaction without standing in town every day is by sharing our story on social media. I've got some, I've made some wonderful contacts. I wouldn't be on this podcast if it wasn't for me posting pictures on social media and talking about what we do. So I think I see that as a real positive. I enjoy doing it. I think with the rangeland thing around the world, I think it's a really good initiative and a great outcome. If you look at a map of the world of the areas that are pretty dry year round, it's a large chunk of the world. So that rangeland is a massive area of the world. You hear some people say, "Well, why don't you just grow crops? Why are you running animals?" What they don't realise is that the majority of the world you can't grow a crop on, and large scale monocultures are a massive detriment to the world environment. We're better off running animals in a lot of parts of the world. So it's an educational piece as well. And I cop a fair bit of criticism for what I write on social media. People think I'm a bit skewed toward the red meat thing. I tend to think probably I'm a bit more skewed towards common sense and standing up for what I see as farmers all around the world doing a fantastic job and actively improving every day. So I think I don't see any downside.
On that note, I think the percentage of the world's surface landmass that is, pastoralism is the greatest land use on the planet. So if you want to influence as many square kilometers of the world's surface as possible, the mechanism to do that, the people you need to influence to do that are the ranchers, the farmers, the pastoralists. So, you know, as you said, people can see that as a challenge or an issue, but it's also a huge opportunity because you can get people to tweak management or do things in a better way. Then there's no other way you can impact that many square kilometers or square miles.
Yeah, there's a pub on the Northern Territory, South Australia border. I think the town's called Colgra. You wouldn't really call it a town. It's just a pub in the middle of nowhere. And there's an old seed drill and an old tractor. It must be 80 or 90 years old, sitting out there. And every time I go past, I haven't been past there in years, but every time I go past there, I think someone had some big ambitions in this part of the world coming out here to grow a crop. It's pretty tough sort of country out there on the Territory South Australian border. And someone at some stage thought, well, we'll come and grow wheat or barley or oats or something out here. That to me, we as a country, I think Australia probably needs to, and we're doing it quite well, release those European shackles of the way we farm. I think for too long that we looked to European methods of farming in Australia. If you look now, we're world leaders in no-till cropping and water use efficiency of crops and retention. And one of the I think the big bright areas of global agriculture should be the Australian cotton industry. It's gone from using a huge amount of water into being an exceedingly water-friendly crop when you look at the production amounts. You see a lot of people give the cotton guys a hard time, but I look at them and think, wow. Yeah. Going back to that we were talking about earlier, how do we get innovation in sheep? We probably need to get a bunch of the cotton guys in and say, how do we mimic what you've done in your industry? That's got to be possibly one of the most exciting industries in Australia. That, to me, they've taken an industry that had some big problems and they've turned it around into a world leader. I think Australia should be congratulating itself and actively congratulating cotton growers for that kind of success. Broadacre cropping's gone the same way. I remember years ago we were doing some contracting work and we put zero till, put in thousands of acres of crop out the back of Burke because it was a rainfall event on a clay floodplain. That's country you would never think of putting a crop in, but the year it just happened to work.
From what you said, what is there anything about what they did, how they did it, to make those changes that you think is worth highlighting?
I don't know the cotton industry well enough. It's something that I continually think I must get to know some people in the cotton industry a lot better and find out. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in those early meetings and just the thought process they went through. Cotton's been pretty much a frontier industry in Australia from, I think it was the 1950s or 1960s when they started growing cotton or whenever it was. There's just been the people behind that industry establishing it, getting it going, dealing with the insect problems in a smart way. They used to have to spray a lot. Genetic modification has really helped that a long way. Whether you like genetic modification or not, I guess is a personal choice. But I think cotton's one of those areas that highlights that it's been a massive success for lowering chemical use and the water use. Like I think cotton per hectare uses less water than a dairy farm.
That's a huge change. That's a huge change.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the big things from, I don't know a huge amount about cotton either, but they have certainly embraced technology and innovation at a greater pace than many of the other agricultural industries, from my understanding.
Yeah, it's an exciting industry. You look at the Cotton Awards and the Cotton Conference, and people are excited to go to it and talk about it for the next 12 months. It's something that's probably on my bucket list to go and attend and have a look at. Like, as I said, I know nothing about cotton. We're in the wrong part of the world to be growing it, but the innovation and the excitement around it, I think, is the exciting part. And if we can transfer that into sheep and cattle, I don't see that there's any downside.
Andrew, we're almost out of time, but before we go, is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't already discussed?
Not that I can think of, no.
Well, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And yeah, great to talk to you as always.
Thank you for listening to the Ash Cloud. Please subscribe to Ash Cloud if you've enjoyed this podcast, where I will continue to discuss food sustainability with guests who bring a deep understanding of the environmental, political, and cultural challenges facing our society and creative ideas on how to address them.